Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cop Watch TV. Just want to welcome everyone into our live show today. Want to say a happy Veterans Day, and also it is the Marine Corps birthday, so I want to recognize all of our Marines out there and all of our veterans. Thank you so much. Our freedom definitely depends on that, so it's an important weekend for sure. And want to say hey to Sergeant George. Haven't seen you in a while. Glad you are doing all right, sir. Real curious to see where everybody is watching from today, so if you can go ahead and put that in the chat. It's possible that maybe one of the stories that we're going to talk about happens in your area, and you may have some inside information on that. Now, what we're going to do here with this live show today is really just talk about the most interesting and the most fascinating stories in policing from the last week, and we do have a bunch of them. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel over here at Cop Watch TV, and then please go ahead and share it with friends and family so we can get as many people not only watching the incredible, interesting, and just raw body camera footage that we put out every single week, but also so they can participate in this live show so we could really get a good discussion going. And that's one of the most important things that I like about this, to talk about interesting police cases and controversial police incidents that happen in real time within the last week or so, and then really to get everybody's opinion on it, because a lot of times people have a different opinion than I do on these cases, and that's a good thing. It's good to flush these issues out and really just talk about them. Again, my name is Daniel. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow me over at Police Law News just about everywhere. And let's see, we got people in today from Canada. Looks like we have someone in from California. We have North Carolina, and let's see, Virginia. All right, it's good to see everybody in the chat today. So as I said, as we're going through these cases, if you have any comments or opinions, definitely go ahead and put them in the chat. We have a couple different controversial cases I think you're going to find really interesting. All right, so the first case we're going to talk about, this happened in Hillsborough County, Florida, which is essentially right outside of Tampa, or right in the Tampa Bay area. So what happened was a mother called police, sheriff's deputies with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department. She called deputies, and she basically reported that her son, a 28-year-old named Ralph Boozy, that he was having a mental health crisis. Essentially, he's in the middle of a mental health crisis. So she called for police officers to assist her. So two deputies with the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department of Florida, they went ahead and responded to that call for service, and when they got on scene, they found the individual. So 28-year-old Ralph Boozy, they found him in a vehicle parked in front of the house. Well, the first thing they did is they went ahead and they made contact with the mom, and they made contact with Mr. Boozy, who again is in the driver's seat of the vehicle. And what police officers did is they essentially tried to convince Mr. Boozy to get out of the car in order to get him some help, but basically take him for a mental health evaluation. So at this point, the mom called didn't allege any kind of crime. So there's no, probable cause for a police officer to detain him or to take him to jail or anything like that. So it's one of those things where they tried to convince him to come out, but Mr. Boozy essentially wasn't having it. So he took off in the car, and at that point, the police officers just let him go. They didn't get into a car chase. They didn't send other officers to go try to find him, because again, and that was the correct decision from police officers, because again, he hadn't committed a crime. There's no probable cause for arrest. Well, a little while later, while police officers are still on the scene, they're outside the house near their police vehicles. They're still talking to the mom, and it's at that point that Mr. Boozy comes back on scene in his vehicle, and he ambushes the police officers. The way that he does that, he essentially drives his car towards them, accelerates, and crashes into the police officers, into their cars. They're barely able to escape without being completely crushed. However, two officers are struck by Mr. Boozy's vehicle. One of the officers, he's a corporal. His name is Carlos Brito. His injuries are so severe that he's probably going to have one of his legs amputated. And one of the other deputy Manuel Santos, he suffered a broken leg as well. So after this happened, after the crash, you can imagine it's pretty much just chaos. However, Ralph Boozy, what he does, it's just really creepy. It's all on body camera video. It's really, really odd and spooky. What he does is he gets out of the car and just casually just starts walking in the middle of the street towards his house. I mean, it's an absolute just crazy thing. He's walking away. He's walking away towards the house. Now, police officers, they get up to the best they can, though the one officer is still on the ground, and they start giving him commands. And, really what they do is they start giving him commands, and essentially they pull out tasers in order to utilize a less lethal option. So just think about this. So here you have the deputies are ambushed. They are nearly killed, and instead of utilizing deadly force or anything like that, and he is reaching into his pockets and stuff like that, deadly force likely would have been justified in a situation like that. Instead of doing that, the deputies give taser warnings. They say taser, 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 but multiple times. It's not just, they don't just tase him right away. They give him multiple, over and over again, warnings that he's going to be tased. So even though the deputies were almost killed, in order to get Mr. Boozy into custody, they use less lethal force, a taser, in order to get him into custody. So they do tase him one time. The taser is effective, and he does go down. He is handcuffed. And just think about that. So it's like the level of restraint that the police officers, the deputies use in that situation is essentially, it's unknown to most humans in a situation like that, because of how the stress and the adrenaline after almost being killed, and the individual who did it being so restrained that all you do is utilize a taser. So that is unbelievable professionalism at work right there. Now, there's a couple different things about Mr. Boozy that I think that we have to talk about. Ethan, I'll answer that here in a second, sir. So that I think we actually have to talk about is that in this case, so Mr. Boozy, this wasn't his first run-in with police officers. So he had actually been arrested 13 different times for misdemeanor crimes. He had been arrested 3 different times for felonies. There was a case back in 2017 where Mr. Boozy was involved in a hit and run. He left the scene. During arrest, he punched the deputy in the face, and then he threatened to kill police officers. And he said that he hated law enforcement and he was going to kill a police officer. And the thing is that when someone says that they're going to kill a police officer, we should believe them. And that's the kind of person that maybe we should lock away in a cage until they can convince us otherwise. So that's the first case that I want to talk about. It's an incredible case, and I'm curious to see if anybody has any comments on that. It looks like Sergeant George says there's no amount of training that you would have let's see if we go back to Sergeant George's comment there. There's no amount of training you would have as a social worker. You would have had enough when it comes to Ralph. Yeah, so this is the kind of thing where, so a lot of times, so let's think about it this way. That's a really good comment, Sergeant George. So a lot of time there are people who say, and sometimes there are different entities inside police departments where they're not all bad. Some of them can be a good idea, where essentially they say, if someone is in the throes of a mental health emergency, then maybe we should just call a social worker. Well, this is an individual where, no, of course, a social worker, this is absolutely not the kind of thing that a social worker should go to, and this is absolutely why something like that. With the Albuquerque Police Department in 2005, there was an individual named John Hyde, and there was a mental health pickup order. Tragically, two police officers that responded to that call were shot and killed. There was a mental health pickup order. Officers Mike King and Richard Smith, they were unfortunately and tragically killed while on a call for service dealing with someone who was in the throes of a mental health crisis. So the idea that we can just call social workers in order to deal with these people, that isn't always the thing. Now, what happens sometimes, and a lot of police departments have this, where, not only do they dispatch police officers, but once the situation is safe, the individual's under arrest, they're under control, they're handcuffed, they're in the backseat of a car, or they're otherwise, not in a space where they can hurt people. Now, once the situation is controlled, at that point, calling in mental health counselors, calling in social workers in order to help at that point, that isn't a bad idea. That's more resources. That could be reasonable. That the idea that the first responders that are going to be dispatched aren't police officers when dealing with this kind of stuff just doesn't make really any sense. Let's see. Ethan asked where I'm from in Illinois. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and then I went to college at Western Illinois University in Macomb, Illinois. After that, I've been living out here in the Southwest for almost 19 years. The southwest part of the country, but I spent 22 years in Illinois, and there's a lot of things I like about about Chicago and about Western Illinois. Okay, so that's that first case. I don't know if anybody watches the podcast Failure to Stop. It's the podcast and that was started by Mike the Cop. One of the regulars on there, his name is Andrew Baxter. He goes as Drew Breezy. He's actually from the Sheriff's Department. He retired as a lieutenant a couple years ago. I've actually been on that show a couple times. Failure to Stop is a really good podcast, but I was going back and forth with Andrew Baxter about this earlier today because this is the Sheriff's Department that he just retired from a couple years ago, and he actually knows the two officers who were injured. So we were talking a little bit about that earlier today. They are suffering serious injuries. Like I said, the corporal is likely going to have his leg amputated. It is just amazing and incredible that the police officer survived because this was captured not only on body camera footage but also on surveillance camera footage. So it's absolutely crazy. Looks like we have an anti-police activist in here, so we'll go ahead and read one comment. When I see a cop, let's see. Oh, someone said there's no good cops, that there would be no bad cops. Well, again, that doesn't make any sense. So let's just say it this way. There's 800,000 police officers, okay? If anyone's going to say that these police officers go out every single day and they risk their lives, yes, of course. Are there going to be some bad cops? Yes. Are they going to make mistakes? Yes. But I actually just looked into this recently. So when we look at the statistics of cops being arrested, it's about 400 cops a year. So take it this way. So there's 800,000 police officers, about 400 are arrested a year. So that is so far below the average number for normal citizens that it is crazy. And you could say, well, cops aren't going to arrest themselves. I'm going to say it's the exact opposite way. It's because that 80% of police officers have body cameras. So, and most of that body camera footage, we're on a body camera channel now. Most of that body camera footage you can get through a public record request. Everybody has cell phones. There's surveillance cameras everywhere. So, like I said, the idea that this is like the 1970s where police officers can just go about, violate people's rights and commit crimes and no one's going to find out. I mean, that's absolutely crazy. We know that isn't reality in 2023. Still, despite that, there's only 400 cops a year who are arrested out of 800,000. So, I mean, it's the idea that cops are criminals as well. They do make mistakes, but the idea that that's a normal thing, the data, the science just doesn't back that up a whole lot. Okay, so the next case that I'm going to talk about is this is a really strange case, and the memes on this, the meme game on this is absolutely, it's one of the best things. Some of the still photographs that have been taken from this case are just absolutely crazy. It looks like this is some kind of a movie. So essentially the theme of this is don't block traffic. All right, so this is a retired lawyer, retired university professor. His name is Kenneth Darlington. He's 77 years old. I've heard that he has dual citizenship both here and also in Panama. So there are some kinds of protests that are going on in Panama, some kind of a deal that the Panama government reached with restarting some kind of a copper mine. Either way, these environmental protesters were blocking traffic. Well, this retired American lawyer and university professor, 77 years old. He's down in Panama, and the road is blocked. And again, I've said this before on a bunch of different episodes of this case that we've done, but essentially don't block traffic, because no matter what happens when you block traffic, no matter what you are actually going for, you're just going to irritate normal people, and there's no way that you're going to have any sympathy from anyone. So usually a lot of these protesters, they show up driving a 1980s truck, and I mean this is something from a movie. So what Mr. Darlington did is, the road was blocked. He got out of his truck. He walked up, and as he was walking up, one of the witnesses reports that he said something to the effect of, "This ends here." He walked up towards the protesters, and he was armed with a firearm. So he was upset. He was armed with a firearm, and even then, they wouldn't go ahead and leave the road. They wouldn't stop what they were doing, and there was some local media on the scene because they were filming this protest. So there were local media who was right there on the scene, and one of the protesters, this is reported by the local media there in Panama, one of the protesters said something to the effect of, "Why don't you shoot?" And then other other people started shouting, "Are you going to kill someone?" It was then someone else, then Mr. Darlington, he reportedly said, "Do you want to be the first?" It was at that point that he opened fire. He shot 2 people in broad daylight. It's on video. The victims were teachers who were protesting, named Abdiel Diaz and Ivan Rodriguez, and they died on the scene. I mean, this just shows how upset and irritated that he was when it comes to this blocking of the traffic. And, I just have a couple takeaways from this. And again, it's don't block traffic ever, because you're going to lose pretty much all sympathy points. But just because someone's blocking traffic, you can't go ahead and shoot people. Even if you're in Panama, even if you were a retired lawyer and a university professor, you obviously cannot shoot people for blocking traffic. Even if they deserve it, on like a basic human decency level, you just can't go ahead and do it. Let's see if people have comments about that. Stacy Griffin says, where I don't like, we have crooked cops. No one likes crooked cops. Again, no one hates crooked cops more than regular cops who go out there every single day and risks their lives for this job. Let's see if we have any other comments on this case when it comes to blocking traffic. I mean, we see that this happens here. A lot of these environmental protesters, they've been doing this in Europe a whole lot. There's a group called Just Stop Oil that they're really big in Europe. They're the ones who go around to all the different museums, and they're, spray painting and damaging old paintings and stuff like that. Let's see. The Sergeant George says the media definitely got their money's worth. Yeah, they absolutely did, because again, the still photographs that they took of Mr. Darlington, again, it looks like it's for a movie cover. It's absolutely crazy. Like I said, it's tragic that people lost their lives, but people are going to get upset. So on a criminal level, no, of course, you cannot shoot and kill people. You cannot use violence against people for blocking traffic, but it is incredibly irritating, and how annoyed people are going to get. This kind of thing is going to happen. So again, I've never heard of anyone saying, you know what, these people who are blocking traffic, who are making people late to work, making it so you can't pick up your kids, who are basically interfering with everybody else's normal daily life, I've never heard of that winning someone over, right? So all it does is irritate people. And again, if you're going to block traffic, no matter what you stand for, I'm going to be opposed to it. It's just absolutely crazy. I think that's how a lot of people feel. Okay, so this next case that we're going to talk about is it's basically another vigilante incident that happened in New York City, and this one is pretty wild, and we've had a couple of these recently, right? So the one before this, if you remember, and it's relevant to this one, because when you're in a situation, especially in New York City, and there's a crime happening in front of you, and you're a normal person, and you're asking yourself, should I step in? Should I step in? Should I do something? Should I not do something? It's one of those things where what happened recently, it actually matters. So, like I said, so the Daniel Penny case, that has to be, the Daniel Penny case absolutely has to be inside everyone's mind when it comes to Daniel Penny. So he was on the train with the individual Jordan Neely, and it was reported that Jordan Neely was mentally ill, and he was threatening people on the train. They're locked in the subway car. It's not like anybody can go anywhere. There were women, elderly women, children, and Jordan Neely was threatening these people. Daniel Penny put him in some kind of a chokehold. Tragically, Jordan Neely lost his life. Obviously, that wasn't the intent. Now, Daniel Penny is charged with murder. Those charges are still pending. So now we have this incident that happened in New York City a couple days ago. So there was a 43-year-old. So this happened Tuesday night around 9:15 p.m. At a New York City subway station. A 43-year-old named John Rote, essentially he's walking around the subway station, just got off, and here's what he sees. He sees a homeless man, ended up being like a 29-year-old homeless, 49-year-old homeless man named Matthew Roche, and he was essentially actively robbing a woman right there in, I mean, it's nighttime, but right there in the public, he's physically robbing her. Robbery is a violent crime. So, Mr. Rote, he sees this. And, okay, so now he sees he has a couple different options, and everybody in this situation is going to have a couple different options. So I'm really curious to see what everybody thinks is the best thing to do in a situation like this. So the first thing that you can do, you just walk away. You can say, okay, there's a violent crime happening there. I don't want to get involved. There's other people here. I'm not going to be an active bystander. I'm just going to completely leave the scene. He could have walked the other way. away. The other thing that he could have done is he could have just called police. And that's what a lot of people are going to say. And I'm not saying that that's a bad idea. Maybe before you take any action yourself, the first thing you should do is to call for police officers, at least to get emergency people on the way. So once, maybe that's the best thing to do. I'm not going to argue with that, right? So, but you have to know that if you call police officers, what's the response time? By the time it goes to the operator to dispatch to the police officer, even if there's an officer right there at the subway station, which maybe there is, even if there's an officer right there, the idea that they're going to be there in 1 or 2 minutes, that is unlikely. And when someone is in the middle of being victimized, as the victim of a violent crime, again, you may not have a minute or two. So the response time at minimum is going to be several minutes. So not saying it's a bad idea, but the idea that you can just call for police, tell them what happened and walk away, again, a lot of people aren't going to be good with that because you have an innocent victim. Also, so now what can you do? You can go ahead and you could try to contact the individual. You could try to get involved. Well, if you get involved, let's say you get involved and let's say, again, not everybody has training. Not everybody was a police officer. Not everyone is a bodybuilder or a boxer or trains MMA. This guy, John Rote, he's a 43-year-old guy. He'd never been in a fight in his entire life. So the idea that he's going to go in and contact someone who's in the middle of committing a violent felony, let's say that they get into a physical altercation. Well, if you get into a physical altercation and you lose that physical altercation right near the subway tracks, you could be thrown onto the subway tracks and die. So again, that isn't necessarily a good option either. Now, let's say you get into that physical altercation like Daniel Penny and you win. And let's say, I'm not going to try to kill this person. I'm going to try to use this chokehold that I've been trained. Chokehold isn't the right word. I know people are going to get on me about them. I'm going to try to use this submission hold, essentially hold this person here for police, but then something doesn't go right because nothing happens in training in the real world like it does in training, and something goes wrong and the individual dies or gets seriously injured. Now, even though you were trying to do the right thing, you were going about your day as a normal person, you see someone being victimized and you make the decision, I'm going to try to help someone out. And in that moment, maybe the person who is actually committing the crime ends up getting hurt or dying. Now you're charged. So now you can face criminal prosecution because of that. So here's what Mr. Rote decided to do. We went through kind of like what his options are. Now here's what he decided to do. He pretty calmly, he has a backpack on. He puts the backpack on the ground. He starts rifling through it. This is all on surveillance camera video. He starts rifling through it and he pulls out a handgun. You could see him start yelling something in the direction of the robbery that's taking place, and then he fires a couple shots. Now, these were warning shots, so he didn't fire it at the criminal. He didn't fire it at anyone. They were warning shots kind of in the air above what was happening. No one was struck by the gunfire. Well, that made the robbery stop. So the individual, Matthew Roche, who was committing the robbery, he stopped kind of like Batman after this was over, like a fucking ghost. John Rote left the scene. Police officers came. They arrested Matthew Roche, the real criminal. They arrested him for robbery. Then the New York City Police Department, they decided to use their limited resources in order to try to find Mr. Rote because he stopped the robbery. Now, again, maybe he didn't stop the robbery the exact way that the politicians who run the New York City Police Department wanted him to stop the robbery, but he stopped the robbery. So what they did is they put his picture all over. They put his picture all over the news. Someone at his job recognized him, and he was arrested. So he was arrested, and he was charged with some nonsense, something like criminal possession of a weapon, reckless endangerment, menacing, essentially like negligent use of a firearm, stuff like that. So okay, so I'm really curious to see what you think. Do you think he should have been charged, and what else could he have done? So I went through some of the options, and I'm not saying that it was a bad idea for him to pull out the firearm. I think that was, again, getting into a brawl with someone near the subway tracks where, again, if you lose, you could be thrown onto the subway and die. And if you win and you harm someone, you could be charged with some kind of a crime. So since you have a weapon, hopefully he's trained on the weapon, though, because he fired warning shots. I'm not so sure. Maybe what he should have done, let's talk about this. Maybe what he should have done is still pulled out the weapon and kind of like a show of force, just like police officers do. You have a show of force, give commands, let the individual know that you have the firearm, be ready to use it, but do more of a show of force instead of firing warning shots, because again, police officers aren't allowed to fire warning shots because that's considered deadly force. So again, I'm not crazy about the warning shots. I would have preferred, and again, this isn't always perfect, but yes, I like the idea of pulling out the firearm, maybe getting a little bit closer, giving some kind of commands or warnings or something like that. But warning shots, and again, a warning shot, basically the bullet bullet could hit someone else. So, yeah. So, and you know what? Just Me says that New York City gun laws suck. They absolutely do. And then they'll arrest him for brandishing. Just Me, you're 100% right. So you're right. So let's say he walked up to the person, he had the gun kind of at a low ready, and he gave commands and the person stopped. Could they go ahead and arrest him for the criminal possession of a weapon, assault, all that kind of? Yes. But you know, it's one of those things where it's like we don't want people to just walk away. We don't want people to not do anything. I'm just trying to think of what can a person do in a situation like this to basically stop the violent crime and also make it so they're safe and hopefully they get prosecuted as little as possible, or obviously hopefully not prosecuted at all. So that was an interesting with that case, and there's just a lot of things that could happen in a situation like this. And again, Mr. Rote, he's not the bad guy here. He's the good guy. He's the hero in this thing because he actually stopped the violent crime from happening. And again, a lot of people, and I asked the same question when it came to Daniel Penny and Jordan Neely, you know, if you want to know who the bad guy is and who the good guy is, here's the question that you have to ask yourself. Would you rather have your teenage daughter be stuck on the same subway car as John Rote or the robber Matthew Roche? You know the answer to that. That's your answer when determining who is the good guy, who is the bad guy. But again, I understand that city officials, you know, at least publicly, they have to disavow any actions of citizens of firing warning shots. I get it. I just hope that behind the scenes that Mr. Rote is essentially given like the key to the city, or at least a sweetheart plea deal and maybe an endorsement from Smith & Wesson. That's kind of what I'm hoping for him. But he is facing these charges. It'll be interesting to see what happened with that particular case. All right, let's see if we have any comments here at all. Ethan Trauberger says cops are here for all of us. Yeah, I agree. And again, yeah, thank you, Ethan. I agree. I mean, the vast majority of police officers go out every single day, and they're just trying to make the world a safer place. Police officers make mistakes. Police officers often do commit crimes. When they do, they should be prosecuted. But the interaction that citizens have with police officers is often just extremely interesting, which is one of the reasons why we have this awesome body camera channel, and we tried to find raw footage to show to everyone to see exactly in the moment. This is people on their best day and on their worst day. They're interacting with police officers. This is what it really looks like, and really given that inside view. That's one of the reasons why we have this channel. And then another reason why we do this live show is really just delve deeper into some of the themes, some of the issues that, you know, really just run through a lot of these cases. Okay, the last case that I'm going to talk about today, and it's basically a legal update. This is a case that a lot of people have been following, and it's really an important case. And it's a case where police officers, so, you know, again, like I always say, if police officers do something that isn't correct or is wrong, I'm going to criticize them too. But again, the criticism doesn't have to be, at least from me, and please call me out if you see me not doing this, is the criticism has to be honest. What I mean is saying all cops are racist, all cops are bastards, I hate all police officers, all that stuff that isn't honest criticism. What I mean by honest criticism is if a police officer does that, pointing out specifically, that's what the police officer did, I think that's wrong. And then being able to back it up, being able to point to a law, a policy, training, and saying the police officer did something wrong, and here's why it's wrong. Here's what I'm going to point to. And this is what police officers should do in the future to make it so that the interactions are safer between police officers and citizens, and that constitutional rights are respected by police officers. And that's where we get into this case. It's going to be a legal update. It's the last thing we're going to talk about today. Please put in the comments if you have any different opinions about this. When we covered this case initially, there were a lot of opinions about it, but it's been a while. So this is essentially the Elijah McClain case from Aurora, Colorado. What happened in this case, this happened a couple years ago in Aurora, Colorado. Elijah McClain was like a 19-year-old, I think he had autism or something to that effect. He was walking along the street at night, and someone called in that he was a suspicious person. Well, that's fine. Citizens are free to call in anybody they want as suspicious persons. That's totally fine. That's reasonable. You know, citizens should do that if they see something. Then when police officers get that information, they have to act on basically what they have at the time. So if someone is walking, if someone calls and says, hey, that guy over there, Dan, that guy in that green shirt, he looks like he's a suspicious guy, and I'm walking down the street, any police officer in the area, they can come up to me and they can say, hey, I'm Officer Smith with the Aurora Police Department. Can I talk to you for a second? Now, it would be up to me whether I want to talk to that police officer or not. What if I say, you know what, I don't feel like talking, and I just keep walking? Well, it's a public sidewalk. I can keep walking, and the police officer, they can keep walking as Well, someone says you're making too much sense. Who cares about facts? Thank you. So police officers, so they can only actually detain someone if there's reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. So reasonable suspicion doesn't mean that someone's suspicious. That's not what it is. But and it's the lowest level police officers need to actually detain someone, and it's a pretty low legal standard, but there is something there. And police officers have to articulate why they think that someone is the suspect of a crime. So articulate what the crime is and why that person is connected. Again, it doesn't have to be that they've definitely committed it. It's not probable cause to arrest, but in order to stop and detain someone, to temporarily detain someone and take someone's freedom away, police officers need reasonable suspicion that a crime is or was being committed. They didn't have that with Elijah McClain. He was walking down a public street. Someone called in, said he was suspicious. Police officers, again, they absolutely cannot take away someone's freedom just based on that. But that's what they did in this case. So this young black kid, Elijah McClain, 19 years old, walking down the street, he does have some emotional problems as police officers, and which I think definitely goes to some of the way that he reacted. But again, he hadn't committed a crime. So police officers contact him and they detain him. Well, they detain him. They try to put him into custody in order to kind of hang on to him. He resists. So again, police officers had no reasonable suspicion. They should not have detained him. Now, obviously, Elijah McClain, if you're being detained by police, and even if the detention is unlawful or you think it's unlawful, the worst thing you should do is fight with police, be combative, and not comply. Because, as I've said before, if police do something that is illegal, if police officers do something that is not proper, and they actually do detain you, and there's no legal reason to do it, it's all going to be on body camera, most likely. If you get a civil rights lawyers will basically be fighting each other in order to represent you, because if it is a clear case where rights are violated, those are the easy. I went to law school. I have more lawyer friends than I have cop friends, okay? That is the easy case for attorneys to try to get some type of a verdict out of the city, or whatever police department or county that it is a violation of civil rights where it's clear that there was no reason to detain. And all of the evidence was collected by police officers on body camera footage. The worst thing that someone could do is resist arrest, okay? You're not going to get anything out of it. It's absolutely crazy to do. But that's what Elijah McClain did. So you have to think about it from the position of a police officer. Let's put ourselves in the mind of a police officer. Here you have someone who is basically called in for being suspicious. A normal police officer, whether it's correct or not, a normal police officer is going to think, well, if this person didn't do anything, then they have nothing to hide. Which, again, that's not the law, but that's the thinking of a lot of police officers. So the more that you resist arrest and are a jerk and fight with police officers, the more the police officer is going to think, holy shit, we have something here. What did this guy do? Because why would a normal person who hasn't committed a crime act like this? Again, it's not the law, it's not training, it's not policy. Police officers should not think this, but we have to talk about reality. That is how police officers think. The more combative and suspicious someone is, the more that's going to heighten the awareness of police officers, again, whether it's right or wrong. And yes, I agree, we should get police officers out of that mindset, which is one of the reasons why I'm highlighting this case now, okay? Because the outcome of this case was a terrible outcome, and I want, not only do I want citizens to be safe, but I want police officers to be safe and to not get themselves into unnecessary trouble, and that's what happened in this case. So they do get Elijah McClain into custody. They have to use some type of a hold on him where they're near his neck, but again, it's that part is definitely overblown, but they never should have detained him. They never should have put him in handcuffs. They never should have used force. It's absolutely crazy. However, because he does have some emotional problems, they do think that something is going on with him, that maybe he needs some medical help. So the police officers do call EMS. So medics get on scene. Now, at that, even though police officers did make some mistakes, and again, let's be honest about when cops make mistakes. There was no reason to detain, and they detained. All of that was wrong, okay? But police officers did think that he was having some type of a medical issue, so they call medics. Well, that's what police officers should do. If police officers think that someone is having in medical distress or needs some help, the correct thing to do, per policy, per law, per common sense, is to call medics on scene. And that's what police officers did. So police officers relayed what happened to emergency medical personnel who came on scene. Emergency medical personnel then did take control of Elijah McClain, who was still kind of resisting arrest, and they gave him ketamine. Now, I'm not a medic, I'm not a paramedic, I've never worked EMS, but what I do know is that the ketamine did end up killing Elijah McClain, and he ended up dying dying. So what happened in this case is that not only were the medics who gave that medication, who made that medical decision, because again, police officers should not be making any medical decisions. They should not tell EMS what to do or what not to do, because that's absolutely crazy. Steve Ladner says, if a phone call can take away a person's rights, you're not free. Okay, yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah, it doesn't matter. So Steve, what I mean by that, Steve, is yeah, I mean, police officers did wrong in this case. I said that they did wrong. They shouldn't have detained Elijah McClain. Police officers make mistakes. They're going to make mistakes. This is one of them. Obviously, cops weren't trying to kill anyone. And again, so the medics, so not only were the paramedics and the EMS workers, were they charged with murder in this case, but police officers were charged with murder as well. Well, at the time I said that's absolutely ridiculous. Now, if you want to say the police officers should not have detained Elijah McClain, so we're going to file a civil rights lawsuit, his estate filing a civil rights lawsuit claiming a deprivation of rights because of the unlawful detention, I'm good with it. I actually think that's the appropriate remedy. Police officers thought that they had a reasonable suspicion to stop him and detain him, but they didn't. That was a violation of Mr. McClain's constitutional rights, the initial detention, and yes, there should be a lawsuit against police officers for that. I'm 100% with you there. I'm absolutely good with it. Now, charging the police officers criminally for what EMS did, to me, that's insane. To me, that makes zero sense, because if you're going to charge police officers for a decision that medics make, then basically what you're saying is that police officers, when the medics want to do something, that they have to check with police officers. And that's not correct at all, because again, most police officers have very little medical training. So medics should not listen to police officers. They should not rely on police officers. Again, I'm not a paramedic. I've never worked as a medic, but the paramedics that I do know, there is absolutely, and just working with them for over 15 years while working on patrol and uniform, there's absolutely nothing that paramedics do in their chain of command that says, hey, we have to ask this untrained police officer how we deal with this person medically. That's insane. Now, the paramedics are going to ask police officers, what did you see? What did you observe? But again, it's absolutely crazy for the medics to listen to police officers. That should not be part of this at all. When medics get on, yes, police officers are in charge of safety, and if someone is under arrest, police officers, they're still in police custody, but any medical decision that 100% has to be, needs to be, should be with the medics. So if the medics do something wrong, it's on them. It is not on the police officer. So there was another officer, so again, there were multiple police officers who were charged, I think 2 or 3 police officers who were charged with murder in this case, and one of them went to trial this past week, and he was found to be not guilty, which again is appropriate. That's the appropriate thing. Again, if you want to sue the police officer civilly for deprivation of rights for thinking there was reasonable suspicion and there not being reasonable suspicion, totally good with it. But again, they should not be charged with murder. That's absolutely crazy. So again, no police officers have been convicted in this case. No police officers are going to be convicted in this case because they never should have been charged. All right, let's see what kind of comments we got on this. So Gary says, medics relied on police officer's description rather than the diagnosis of the victim. I agree, Gary. Yeah. So in this case, the medics, for whatever reason, relied on what the police officer said happened instead of, looking at what they had in front of themselves and doing an actual medical evaluation. That seems a strange thing for a paramedic to do. And let's see, Neon Tetra says cops will be reluctant to call the medics now. What a crazy ruling. Yeah, I mean, it could be, but again, police officers have policies that they have to follow, and people will, police officers will call medics when they need it. Dude, slow down. Yeah, I know I talk fast. It's just one of those things. That's how I talk on the show. All right, let's see if we have any other comments on this case. Otherwise, that's going to be the last one that we talk about. So again, I just want to wish everyone a good weekend. Everyone be safe. Again, this is Veterans Day and it's the Marine Corps birthday. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who is serving and everyone who has served. Again, our freedom definitely depends on this, and we thank you all very much. And again, please, if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel, Cop Watch TV. Make sure that you share it with friends and family. Hope everybody has a great weekend, and we'll go ahead and see you next week. Thank you.